connect the work that we do in both of these spheres in the same region or the same populations, so that we can provide an off-ramp for people who are struggling in countries that have lots of displacement, with opportunities for development locally as well.
This is another episode of a special series called Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. This series sheds light on 75 years of an NGO called CWS. My name is Maurice Bloem and I welcome you to another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Okay, good day everybody. This is another episode of the special podcast series Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. As always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce himself. Paul, please go ahead.
Well, thanks, Maurice. My name is Paul Chan, and I am 55 years old and currently residing in Kansas City, Missouri. And I've been involved in the work of CWS for a number of years. And my regular day job is as a physician. I spend about a third of my time as a practicing cardiologist, and the remaining 2/3 of my time doing cardiovascular research in the academic fields.
Hey, and Paul, you are also on the board of CWS. Can you tell the audience, the listeners, for how many years have you been with the board and what is your present role?
I believe I've been on the board for about 10 years. It's either 9 or 10 years. It's a little bit cloudy as to the actual duration. But I started with the board at the turn of the 2010 or 2011 year, and have been serving on the board as a general board member for almost all that time. About a year ago, I was asked to step in as one the treasurer, and have been part of the executive committee since then. And I'll continue for another year as part of the executive committee as the treasurer before I step off the board.
And do you still remember the first time you heard about CWS?
I do. My wife is from middle of Michigan, a town called Mount Pleasant, Michigan. And her parents have been very involved with a number of social and economic justice issues. And they were organizers of the local crop hunger walk in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. And her father was the treasurer of that crop walk for a number of years, probably for 5 or 6 years. So my first clear memory of CWS was really participating in one of the crop walks in Mount Pleasant and getting to know the community and the local programs that the walk supported. And I was involved with a number of different organizations with hunger and sustainable development, primarily in Central America. So it was really aligned with what I was interested in my sort of extracurricular activities and my passions in terms of global hunger and justice work.
And for the listeners who know that I started this podcast as a result of a 100-mile walk that I started to do more than 10 years ago. People always congratulate me, and then I said, well, this is nothing if you hear about what Paul is doing. So can you maybe tell the listeners about what you have been doing also for more than 10 years now, and you just finished a special walk. So tell us about what you're doing and why and how it has been going this year.
So we have been doing a special sort of crop walk for the last 13 years. It started in 2010, and we've been doing this annually every fall, typically in late October, but occasionally in early November. And what we do is do a walk actually in the Grand Canyon to support the work of CWS. For those who've been in the Grand Canyon before, we start on the south side, or the south rim side of the Grand Canyon, and a group of us go from the south rim at the top down 10 miles to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and then we continue on to the north rim side, to the opposite side, and it's a 15-mile journey up towards the north rim for a total of 25 miles. And then we turn around and head back the same 25 miles, going down the 15 miles to the bottom and back up the 10 miles to the top for a total of about 50 miles in a 24-hour period. And I actually, the first 2 years that we did this walk, I was doing it by myself. And it really started, it was the summer of 2010, and my son, who was 6 years old then, had asked me when we encountered a man sleeping on the streets in the early morning when we were taking a walk. He had asked me throughout the day about who that man was and why he was sleeping on the sidewalk, and why he had no place to live, and asked a number of follow-up questions about whether or not he had family and whether or not he had a place to eat. And it occurred to me that while both Katie, my wife, and I have been involved and continue to be involved with a number of organizations, we had not done enough of a good job exposing our children to the community around them that were also in need. And so out of that sort of conversation and reflection with the encounter with the homeless man that my son had witnessed, I thought about whether or not it would be helpful to do a special walk that year to really highlight and fundraise for the work of CWS and CROP. And we chose the Grand Canyon, or I chose the Grand Canyon, because I had actually previously worked and lived on the Navajo Reservation in northeastern Arizona for 4 years, and had hiked in the Grand Canyon a number of times, and had gone from one side to the other and brought groups to hike that way, but had always thought about whether or not it was doable to try to go back and forth and do the 50 miles in one day. And although we had planned to do that the last year that I was working on the Navajo Reservation, something came up and the plans were scrapped. And so it was always one of the things that I wanted to do in my bucket list. And as a result, we decided that we would align the fundraising efforts in response to my son's queries that day to do a special walk with my interest in doing this walk in the Grand Canyon to make it a more, if you will, a hyperbole effort to try to stimulate people's interest in the fundraising and in some ways to sensationalize the effort. It was meant to be a one-time journey. When I got done, it was very clear to me that it was something that I would never want to do again. I probably limped around for 2 weeks afterwards, and there were a lot of lessons learned about what not to do. But probably 4 or 5 months after that walk, that first year, people started asking when we were going to do it again, and it occurred to me that this was something that people were either interested in or wanting to know whether or not this could be something that we would repeat year after year.
I mean, I'm keeping a silence because I when I do my 100-mile walk in a week, which is 15 to 20 miles, I'm exhausted after that week. So it's unbelievable that you continue doing this, and you have done this. It's yeah. I mean, I'm 6 to 7 6 hours a day I'm walking. And when I'm accompanied, people would accompany me for a couple of miles, and then they would say, okay, we'll see you at the end. So so a lot of admiration for what you're doing. I mean, one is that you have done it so many times, and then second is also that you have been able to together, all these people to walk with you. You call it a walk, but I know how hard it is to walk already 20 miles a day. You must be running almost, right? Or when do you leave and when do you come back? How's that?
Yeah, we actually don't run very much on the trail, mostly because we recognize that it's very easy to strain something in our knee or our hip, and having understood that we have to descend a total of about 10,500 feet when we descend both the south and the north rims. It's probably smarter to walk fast rather than to run, and allows us to have more durability and stamina. And so we typically have left either at 3 a.m. in the morning, in which case we usually get back at about 1 a.m. In 22 hours, completing the trek. More recently, in the last 4 years, we've left at 1 a.m. and have been getting back closer to 11:30 or 12 midnight. So it's been taking us a little longer, more closer to 23 hours. And the reasons for the longer duration is probably because we have a few more people who are attempting the 50-mile journey. And also because we are getting older as well. I'm 55 now, and I probably don't hike at the same level as I was 10 years ago. As you know, it's tiring to walk 10 to 20 miles, and it's really tiring to do it 7 days to accomplish 100 miles. One of the challenges we struggle with is food. And it's something that we don't normally think about, but for a shorter hike, but it becomes very hard to start eating the same food over and over again after 12 hours and after the first 25 miles. And the struggle really is the return. The remaining 25 miles is not only physical, but it's also mental and it's also nutritional. And so we've learned a number of strategies over the years, but every year we still have people who continue to have issues with different components of the challenges that we face.
Yeah, also, blisters and stuff, right? And that might be different. What I found out, and it gets really technical podcast, but I sweat a lot. So I if I change socks, that really helps for me. So I don't know if you have the same experience.
We've learned over the years two things really make a huge difference. The first is actually wearing 2 layers of socks, a very thin liner sock, and then either a wool-based or quick-drying neoprene sock for the outer layer. And so the thin layer allows your feet to glide along the shoe and the outer sock, so you're not actually creating as many blisters. And if you know the areas that you are more prone or that I'm more prone to having blisters, duct taping that area of the foot before you actually hike is an added way to prevent these problems with blisters. We change socks every time we get to the bottom or to the top, and so having 2 pairs of each has also made a huge difference.
Great. Yeah, no, I found it out also the hard way. So yeah, thanks for the tips, Paul. Yeah, people still can support you, right? For this year's walk, which you did 2 weeks ago, or when did you do that?
We did it on November 5th, so it was about 2.5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
One of the things, Maurice, that we've been really blessed and surprised by is the community of support that has continued to stay with us every year. I think we have a very loyal donor base, partly because it's a very personal ask when we ask people to support us. They're people who we've known typically for a number of years. They're family, work colleagues, church members, synagogue members that belong to our own institutions of worship, neighbors, and it's a very eclectic collection of individuals. We in the early years, they were people that were more representative of actually the food industry. We had CEOs of organizations that did work with ingredients or actual production of food. And in more recent years, I've had more physicians partake and join.
Mm.
But in each instance, we have found that they bring new energy, new enthusiasm, new supporters. But I think they really believe in the core effort and in the work that CWS does. They also really find that because 25% of the money stays in the local Kansas City area, and we really have made it a point to identify a handful of local organizations that do novel work to address hunger that goes beyond a Band-Aid in our own city that people then can identify with and understand more tangibly where the money is going. The other thing I think that makes a huge difference for our supporters is we tell a story, whether it's in our fundraising that starts typically 6 weeks before we hike. We send an email every week about asking for money, but also where the money goes. And sometimes it's a description of individuals at the local organizations, people that we have gotten to know and walk with over the years and spend time with. Because a number of us continue to work with those organizations throughout the year in Kansas City itself. Or portrayals and vignettes of individuals highlighted by CWS and their hunger and development work. So really trying to piece a story, weave a fabric for people to understand that their donations are making a tangible difference in the lives of people. And then we try to guide people throughout the day of our walk with us. We provide them a tracker that they can follow us in live time as to where we are in the Grand Canyon. It's a satellite-based signal. And we send them a reflection about what the walk meant to us before and after we returned from the hike. And I think it has made a difference. One of the things we hear back from supporters oftentimes is, you're one of the only charities or giving that we give every year to that we hear back from the people we gave to. We get a story, we get an update, we get a reflection, we get a tracker that we can follow. And it's made a difference in terms of the loyalty of the donor base.
Great. Can you quickly tell, maybe, give an example of one of the local recipients of this year's walk that you do?
Yeah, one of the organizations in Kansas City is called Reconciliation Services. They're located on the street called True Street, which is the divide between black and white. So Kansas City was a very segregated city, and it's located actually on a historic plantation, a slave plantation in the past. And they have been doing the work of reconciliation in the community. They had a soup kitchen that they were feeding folks until about 7 years ago. And they decided to transform the soup kitchen into a cafe called Thelma's Cafe. And this is one of the reasons why we support Reconciliation Services. The Thelma's Cafe pre-pandemic was a 3-hour lunch from 11 to 2. And anybody in the community can come in and get a 3-course meal. The cost of the meal was $7, but if somebody could not afford the whole $7, they put in whatever they could, 50 cents, $2. And if they didn't have any money, then they volunteered for half an hour. So they empowered people in the community to be part of this effort. And they ensured the dignity of the folks by allowing them to contribute either monetarily or by volunteering in the kitchen. We have business people who are plopping $100 for a meal just because they believed in the cause. And they sat at the same table. These are long tables There's like 4 or 5 long tables in Thelma's kitchen with people who are homeless or people who are poor and had conversations that they would never have had they not had Thelma's kitchen. You don't see these types of conversations in a typical food pantry or soup kitchen, where the volunteers, quote unquote volunteers, are not sitting down and eating with the guests. This is a collaborative experience of intentionally bringing people who had means and who did not have means to have a conversation about the economic struggles and the lifelines of people on True Street, the dividing line between black and white in Kansas City. Reconciliation Services at the same time had created 300 jobs for individuals in the community. And they also ensure the provision of ID cards for folks. This is something a lot of us take for granted because a lot of us have a passport or a driver's license. Many people in the community there do not drive. And without an ID card, they can't vote, first of all. They can't get services. They can't apply for Medicaid. And so not having an ID card really deprives you of services that are available. But because you don't have that ID card, makes you even poorer than what poor people should be. And so what Reconciliation Services has done is create a template of ensuring food security, but not in an undignified way in the community. It's creating jobs in the community, and it's creating access to services that oftentimes people overlook when they think about ways that they can help folks who are hungry and who are poor. And that's one of the organizations that we found is novel and transformative and imaginative and creative in terms of how they address hunger in the Kansas City area.
Great, and thanks for sharing that, Paul. We should not forget that you provide me with a link that I can put then in the podcast notes, that people can still support your walk of this year, which is important, and that's great. You mentioned 25%, stays in the local community. The rest goes to CWS, who then uses for international as well as, within the US for its activities. What do you like about the work of CWS? Why have you started this, supporting this organization, and now, for more than 10 years already on the board?
Right. Yeah. So what drew me to CWS initially was, as we talked about, was the crop walk and starting out in Mount Pleasant with my wife's parents, who were involved very actively locally in their crop walk. And a lot of my work in college and in medical school and after medical school was really working on issues of sustainable health and development and really thinking beyond Band-Aid solutions to inequities and to hunger. And in the case of global health, a lot of what we normally see visibly, at least in the images of global health and hunger, is infant mortality and early childhood mortality, deaths of children before age 5. It used to be the case that diarrheal disease was the number one killer of children, but it's now moved to number 2 after respiratory diseases like pneumonia, because of the advances that have been made in water and hygiene. And so one of the things I've been very passionate about and have been working since 1990 in Central America was really on sustainable solutions to addressing hunger, especially in rural communities where people are oftentimes the poorest in any resource-poor country, primarily in Guatemala, but also in Nicaragua and Peru. And so one of the reasons why I was really interested in being part of the CWS organization and board was because of the work that CWS has historically been involved with in global health and hunger. And part of it is funneled by the crop walks, but also by the denominations themselves, and the mission of that hunger and development work to be long term and to really look at addressing the core reasons why people are hungry or dying of hunger. And one of those is clearly for especially children, diarrheal disease, which predisposes them to malnutrition and further exacerbates the likelihood of getting more diarrheal disease subsequently. And so really, CWS was a more international organization of what I was doing in Central America. And so that's the initial reason why I was really particularly interested in becoming more involved in CWS. I have been involved even as young as a college student on issues of war and health and human rights, and spent a good amount of time as a college student in Guatemala and Nicaragua during the civil wars in the 1980s, working with children and art therapy and learning about the impact of the war on children's psyche through their own drawings and through their art. And so I've been very also interested in work of displacement and refugees. I spent a year actually lobbying as a volunteer lobbyist with an organization called Bread for the World in Washington, D.C. And that year I spent, my volunteer year was primarily working on hunger legislation in the Horn of Africa, in Somalia, Sudan, and Ethiopia, and really thinking about how to, as the organization was thinking about how to redefine U.S. foreign aid so that the food aid that we provided was not weaponized by the governments and only directed to their supporters, so to speak, and tying food aid to more conscientious and intentional deliveries so that it wasn't going to be weaponized. And so the work of CWS on refugees and resettlement also aligns with a lot of the work that I've done in my life, but that wasn't the initial reason why I came to CWS. But it's a terrific complement to the hunger and development work that it does.
No, and Bread for the World is still a very important coalition partner for CWS. I mean, as you know, part of our work is also doing a lot of advocacy work, both on the refugee resettlement related work as well as on the hunger related work. So I'm really, pleased that you lift that up, because not everybody knows that, but it is really an essential part of our work and crucial to continue doing so in order to reach these sustainable development goals that we should reach as a world. Paul, CWS exists for more than 75 years now, and when it was celebrating its 50 years, they published a book that was called 50 Years of Help and Hope. And we haven't published, we decided not to publish a book for the 75th anniversary, but we have now these podcasts that are going on. But let us assume that we did publish a book for the 75th birthday. What is then the title that you would come up with for the book?
I'll have to think about that.
Or the keywords, the keywords that you would use.
I mean, I think some of the key attributes of the work of CWS include solidarity, accompaniment, especially as we think about the work that CWS does with refugees and displaced peoples and resettlement. I'm trying to think about other words as well. I would say that those two stand out. And in many ways, the work on hunger and development, again, is really looking at solidarity. And then maybe a third word I can think of is empowerment. And empowerment, not just of communities that the anti-hunger programs and work is directed, but also empowerment of people who are refugees and ensuring that when they are resettled, let's say in the United States, that they're not doing this alone, that they're doing this in the context of support and of community.
If I'm asked, to describe the evolution of CWS, I often say, well, it started in 1946 as a Christian organization, a U.S. Christian organization, working ecumenically because, a lot of our member organizations decided we should collaborate, because we can do more together than we can do apart. Over the years, I think CWS has become more a global organization, interfaith. So not everybody agrees with me. So if you hear me describing CWS, what are your thoughts? And, why would you agree with what I'm saying or why not?
My personal upbringing is I did not grow up in a Protestant denomination. So in some ways, I'm outside of the member communions of CWS. My upbringing is Catholic, although I would say that there was a strong Buddhist presence. My father was Buddhist before he converted to Catholicism to marry my mother, but I don't think that influence was gone after that conversion. And I studied Buddhism as part of my major when I was in college, and so I would say that in thinking about the member communions and the origins of CWS, certainly it arose from the denominations, and then the denominations played a large role in the rise of CWS many years ago. And in many ways, the early years of the crop walk were very denominationally centered. We, even as recently as 10, 15 years ago, would see at crop walks busloads from churches that would come and drop off literally whole congregations or mini congregations that would walk together and sometimes under a flag, if you will, or a banner for their denomination, and really highlighting and celebrating the strength of their participation and their support for the work of CWS and their support of the social justice work that their parish or their denomination were grounded in. I would say that CWS remains centered in a consciousness that it is a faith-based organization, that it is inspired by its faith in the types of decisions that it makes, the vision that it sets forth, and the goals and the mission for the people that they work with. And in many ways, that's in one way, I should say, that's what sets CWS apart. They also, because they are guided by faith as a foundation for why they are involved in the work that they do, they have a unique ally to the denomination who do substantial advocacy, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or with the state representatives who can lobby and really make their voices heard beyond the actual staff of CWS, saying that this is an important concern, this is an important thing that we need to focus on as a country. And that's a unique thing for CWS that you don't see in other global health and hunger organizations. And because of that, I think we have a very rich thread, but at the same time, we are not a missionary organization, and we are not just a faith denominations organization. We have tremendous participation from other individuals, either because they're not part of those member denominations, but really believe in the mission and the vision and the work of CWS, or they are part of the member denominations, but they are participating because they are also faith inspired and want to be grounded in an organization that has similar principles to do and continue the work of of hunger and work against hunger, I should say, and relief of hunger, but also with refugees. So I think that it's a unique organization in the sense that its identity was born of the member denominations, but at the same time, it's evolved to be an organization that is able to straddle the secular and the religious.
Let me piggyback a little bit on your observation. That we have grown over the years to be more, to be a community that goes beyond, faith. I mean, our original denominations. I think that's something to be proud of. That's great. Having said that, the fact that the name of this organization is Church World Service has created also some challenges. I mean, some people, are scared because of that word, and you have been very involved. We have had and still have discussions about should we change that name from Church World Services to something else. What is your opinion about that in terms of looking at a possible name change and completely acknowledging that for us looking at a possible name change is only one aspect of all the discussions that we have around our brand, and what do we need to be in 2023 and beyond. But
as you know, we had internal conversations on the board and as an organization about whether we are helping or hindering ourselves with the word church in the name of the organization for Church World Service. And I think that discussion and dialogue continues. And at the same time, I think we struggled with a different name for the organization. I don't think that it was clear that there was anything else that made sense or resonated well with either the board or the organization, or perhaps beyond the organization, the member communions and our supporters. I think that in some ways, rather than focusing on renaming of the organization, trying to understand how we can best communicate the work of CWS is the critical juncture that we need to do better. I would say that we do so many different things, and specifically, we do the anti-hunger work, but we also do the refugee and displacement work, which in many ways overlaps. If you look at Venn diagrams, people who are hungry oftentimes are the ones who are at greatest risk of displacement as well, or disasters and climate change. But we haven't perhaps done as seamless a job about telling the story. I agree with you that the name church in the name of CWS can be an automatic turnoff for potential supporters or people just interested in the work of CWS. And I would suppose that continues to be the case, even if we did a better job telling the story. But I think if we can tell the story and weave the story better, we would ultimately be able to communicate more effectively and perhaps find even greater numbers of allies for the work that we do.
So, part of this looking at branding is also looking at yourselves. How did we do? How should we do better? Today and in the future. In our mission statements, we have written that we are fighting injustice, and I think a big topic, part of the injustice is racial injustice. So, if I ask you to look at the activities that CWS did, from 46 over those years to now, did we do enough? What do you like? What are your observations around racial injustice, and especially in this country, but also beyond?
during the time that I've served on the board, I know that CWS has oftentimes taken stance uh, um, on issues of justice, and some of those have been on racial injustice, whether they were the beating of Black individuals by police, uh, or other instances where it was clear in the United States that there were issues of race involved. I would, however, be cautious in expecting that CWS would be outspoken on every issue of racial injustice, let's say in the United States, because although we see ourselves as a justice-based organization, um, there's only that many things that we can be vocal on all at the same time. And that is to say, the same question could be asked: have we been uh, vocal on every issue of sexual discrimination and gender-based justice, or with the emergence of many more individuals who identify as non-binary or transgender or LGBTQI? Have we been involved and vocal on the critical issues of gender diversity? I think that we started out as a belief and a hunger organization, and that is our forte. And I think that we need to call out injustice that fosters systems of oppression that keeps people, or one class of people, poorer or hungrier, or more displaced and without homes. And I think that there are times when we should take a stance regarding issues that are even outside of our core mission. And I think CWS has at times taken those stands when it saw that it was something that was resonating with a core principle of their faith guidance. And it goes back to, again, CWS being a faith-based and a faith-inspired organization, that these are issues that cannot be left unspoken. There probably have been times when we should have been vocal about other issues of injustice, whether it's racial or gender or otherwise, that we were not, either in the United States or in other countries that we've worked in, like Pakistan in the past. But I think that there is probably some limit as to how we can keep up with all the potential things that we should be speaking up on that are perhaps outside of the core activities of CWS.
If you look at your time, especially on the board, have you been happy with the organization finding a good balance within that, or? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I think that there have been times when we really highlighted and aligned ourselves with other organizations that spoke up against, like more recently with the, especially around the time when COVID emerged in 2020, with the numerous issues with police and relationships with and incidents of beating of Black individuals. We've been involved in ensuring that there is diversity on the board, both gender and racial diversity, recognizing that this is something that is important for the organization as a whole, but also to set the standard for other organizations as well. We have in the organization a policy of respect and ensuring that individuals who are LGBTQI feel free to express their own sexuality and their own gender identity without fear of retribution. Mm-hmm. And more recently, CWS took a stance on the promotion of women's reproductive health, and that the decision, their autonomy to be able to have access to not just abortion, but decisions about their own sexual and gender-based health should be left to only they themselves, and not to have interference with legislation or government entities. And so I think that in many ways, CWS has stepped up to the plate to address these concerns. It's also been involved in being, and it was not a popular decision, I'm sure, at the time during the Obama administration to stand up and support the people of Cuba as well, and normalization of relationships that had been many decades delayed because of U.S. policies and because of the Castro regime.
Can you share, Paul, maybe an anecdote or an experience what best describes your time with CWS?
I mean, we sort of talked about this in some ways. My most powerful memories of CWS has been the Grand Canyon Walk that I've been involved with for the last 13 years, because it's something that has been it's repeated, and it's been a fixture of every fall. I mean, I think that what isn't probably apparent to folks when they hear about the walk is that it's probably a 2-month process of getting things set up and the fundraising and the logistics. And I thank every donor with individual emails. And so it's a very, it takes about 2 hours every night to go through, or maybe sometimes an hour to 2 hours every day to thank every donor that donates to the walk. And part of that is because we have been successful. And in the last 3 years, we've raised, the 3 years combined, over $500,000. And this year was broke all records, and we were at 186,000. And because of that, it's really just a very time-consuming thing. And so, in many ways, my image of CWS is really emblazoned on the fact that every fall I have 2 months of my life where it seems like it's all about the walk. So.
No, I totally get it. Although, I think the listeners should also realize that you also have been traveling around with young students, showing the work of CWS, right? So you have also been doing that on top of your walk. So
yeah, I would say that that's one of the joys of having been a board member, and also just I'm very interested in getting young people, local high school students, interested in thinking about the world and the school where my kids went. I started taking students overseas to learn about health and hunger and development, and how best they can be involved, and how they can be involved in a way that also ensures the dignity of the people that they purport to help, and thinking critically about why there's injustice, how does that come about, how is it sustained, these structures that oppress people around the world. And so we've taken a group to Vietnam and really spent some time with the CWS local group of employees, and they spent 2 days in particular doing the water filters, but they spent the other parts of the time understanding what happens to a community before and after the work of development. I've taken students to different organizations work in Guatemala 3 times to do the same very thing, to understand why children are still dying of diarrhea, even to today, when it's very easily preventable or treatable, and what can be done to address that in a way that is gonna continue long after they left, after the week with the people in the communities there.
if I ask you to name a colleague, board member, a partner organization, or a supporter of CWS, or a staff member, who best embodies what CWS is about, who will you name and why?
I would say, going back to our trip in Vietnam, I don't know if you've been to the projects there
Yeah,
that
no,
we
I have.
do,
Yeah.
but Zone was the person that I had multiple calls with
Mhm.
before we took the students over. But I could see the reason why he was involved was not just because it was a job. He really saw the need in the community. He saw also the need to develop relationships with the communities. We were we flew into Hanoi, but then drove 10 hours the next day to spend the week in the villages there. And it was very clear to me that he had very good communication skills. He had established rapport with each of the villages that and the schools that we spent time with. And he also ensured that there was um, an opportunity for the local villagers to step up and really take leadership. And that really embodies the work that CWS strives to do. It's not just coming in and doing the project and then leaving, but really building and planning, really planting the seeds of the relationships, so that not once one project is done, there are opportunities to be involved in collaborating with other um, projects and work of development, so that it can synergize with the water filter project, for instance, that was just done, so that ultimately we can more effectively address the children who were having severe malnutrition or diarrhea or even dying prematurely.
Um, Paul, these conversations always go fast. So my last question for you is any last wish or something you want to say to CWS?
I think that we are nearing a crossroads as an organization. We have a crossroads both in terms of opportunity and also in terms of threats to the work that we do. We are finding that our organization has uh, exploded in revenue in the last 2 years, primarily because of the increased demands that the U.S. government has of organizations that can work with refugees and resettlement work. And CWS has been one of the main beneficiaries of that opportunity. Um, and so in many ways, we are positioning ourselves in a very good position for expanding that work and really maturing that work. Um, and again, because CWS is a faith-inspired organization, it provides a unique way of connecting the people who have lost so much in their lives for whatever reason, it's whether it's climate change, disasters, war, um, to the hope of a new life. But at the same time, I think that there is the threat of that funding not always being there in the future. And we need to also start thinking about, and I know we are starting to think about how to diversify the opportunities that we have had right now to tie in better the work that we do with hunger and development in the future, so that we can tell the story and weave the fabric even tighter for CWS. We want to not only support people who are displaced and support people who are dealing with severe food insecurity, whether locally or globally, but is there a way to connect the work that we do in both of these spheres in the same region or the same populations, so that we can provide uh, off-ramp for people who are struggling in countries that have lots of displacement, with opportunities for development locally as well.
Paul, it's always a delight to speak with you and to listen to you. Thank you so much for everything you do. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah, and we'll make sure that the link will be in the podcast notes so that people can really support you and the other people that walked with you. Yeah, thank you so much for today and for who you are also, Paul. Thanks.
Maurice, you've been fabulous in terms of your 100-mile walk, and you've inspired lots of people as well. And it's been great having this conversation with you too.
Do you see you? Do you see me? Will you be the eyes so that we all can be?
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you want to know more about Church World Service, please check out cwsglobal.org. Thank you.